Now, at a courtroom in Manhattan today, President-elect Donald Trump was formally sentenced in his hush money case. It is the only Trump criminal case to reach a verdict. As expected, the judge granted Trump an unconditional discharge. He receives no jail time, no probation, and no fine. But Trump is still a convicted felon and plans to appeal. The CBC's Chris Reyes has more from the courthouse.
What an incredible final act. I mean, I don't think anybody would have been able to predict that this is how this historic case would conclude. We were here for all those weeks last year as this historic trial took place right in that courthouse. We were here for the guilty verdict when Donald Trump was still just the presumptive Republican nominee for president. And now that this sentencing has concluded, he is 10 days away from once again becoming the U.S. president. Justice Juan Merchan called this case extraordinary. I want to show you inside the courtroom because we do have images available now from the proceedings that took place this morning. Lasted about an hour. We heard briefly from the prosecution and then the defense. And then we heard from Justice Juan Merchan. He said he didn't want to go over all of the details of the case, but he did want to explain why he was handing down an unconditional discharge, essentially a sentence that will have no jail time and no fine. Donald Trump will be free to walk away with no strings attached, only a criminal record. Justice Merchan said that that was the only lawful sentence that he could give, given the circumstances, the fact that Donald Trump is about to become the U.S. president once again. He said the extraordinary legal protection of the office of the president overrides many factors. However, he made it a point to say that it does not override the power of a jury's verdict. And in a ruling last week, Arthi, he went into great detail about that. He talked about the sanctity of a jury's verdict and how it's foundational to this country's justice system. So with all of that done, with that final act, essentially, at least for Justice Merchan's courthouse, this is case closed.
And now, Chris, we know that the inauguration of President-elect Trump is 10 days away, so there's much more to come after this, of course, moment.
That's right. So, I mean, the first answer of what's next is the inauguration is next. That's 10 days away. But also now Trump's legal team can fully activate the appeals process. And what's incredible is that that appeals process will be happening while Trump is in office. However, what the sentencing really did not accomplish for Trump's team is that it did not overturn the conviction, which means that when Donald Trump takes the oath of office next week, he will be a convicted felon, the only one in this country's history, and that in itself is pretty incredible. One other notable thing to come out of the courthouse that we should mention, Arthi, is that Justice Merchan essentially concluded his sentencing by telling Trump, who appeared virtually, so he was just in the courtroom via a TV screen, he said, "I wish you Godspeed as you take on your second term." So really acknowledging what happened in the election results.
The CBC's Chris Reyes in New York. So we do want to stay on this story, and for that, we're joined now by Nick Ackerman. He's a former Watergate prosecutor who also served as Assistant U.S. Attorney in the Southern District of New York. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, Nick, Donald Trump gets an unconditional discharge, as we just heard, on 34 charges of business fraud related to a hush money payment to Stormy Daniels. What does that mean?
Well, what it means is he's got on his resume forever that he's a convicted felon, unless somehow he's able to overturn this on appeal. I think the odds are very much against that. I think the evidence is pretty strong. The decisions by Judge Merchan are extremely strong. I just don't see how he gets to having this overturned.
Now, Trump has called this sentencing, in his words, a despicable charade. So to the point of how to get this overturned, can he formally appeal his conviction now?
Oh, sure. I mean, he can appeal it. He first has to appeal it to the New York State system. through the appellate division, the intermediate appellate court, then to the highest court in New York, the New York Court of Appeals. And from there, he could try and appeal it to the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, they don't have to hear it. So we don't know how long that's going to take. But I don't think his chances are very great. I mean, he's just lucky that he was not given a prison sentence under these circumstances. Judge Mershon could have very well have sentenced him to some term of imprisonment that would have started at the end of his presidential term. And for reasons that I don't understand, he did not do that and probably should have, as far as I'm concerned. But the appeal goes forward now.
We are days away, of course, from the inauguration of President-elect Donald Trump, wondering whether or not he may be able to pardon himself once officially in office.
Well, he can't pardon himself from this one. This is a state conviction. He has no power to pardon anyone, including himself, for state crimes. The only person that can pardon him is the governor of New York. That's it, Governor Hochul, or whoever follows her. But he certainly has no power whatsoever over this conviction.
Now, we know that when someone is a convicted felon, there are certain restrictions that apply to them, the way they must conduct themselves, the way they must navigate, for example, travel, which is sometimes very important when it comes to a leadership position such as the U.S. president. What sort of restrictions could Donald Trump face now that he is a convicted felon? And how might that impact diplomacy efforts, for example?
Well, a normal person, yes, this would be not a great thing to have because it would impair your employment opportunities. It would impair your ability to get loans from banks. It would impair your ability to travel to certain countries. But I think in this particular circumstance where he's president of the United States and he's, has enough money to live on, doesn't have to worry about getting another job after this, will have a pension from the government. Doesn't seem to me that this is going to have any, effect on him other than it's simply not a resume builder.
We talked a little bit about next steps too, and we touched on that as well. What comes next for the president-elect following this sentencing?
Well, I think what he's going to do is immediately file an appeal with the First Department, the appellate division, which is that intermediate court, and that'll take some time. People have to write, both sides have to write briefs. There's a schedule set up, and that could very well take anywhere from 6 to 9 months. And then if he loses that, which I suspect he will, he then will try to appeal it to the New York Court of Appeals. And from there, it's discretionary whether or not the Supreme Court would even hear the appeal at that point.
And of course, you've got a lot of history here to draw on. So I finally just wanted to ask you, in terms of how extraordinary this is to have a convicted felon 10 days away from inauguration.
Totally off the charts, totally extraordinary. Never has happened before in this country. There is no question that this is an all-time first. He's just lucky that he was able to delay the other cases to the point where he did not get convicted in the Washington, D.C. case or the classified documents case. And of course, the case in Georgia is still up in the air. That's being appealed now to the Georgia Supreme Court. And that case could come back to bite him after he leaves office if, in fact, everything is reinstated there. So this is going to continue to some extent. There's going to be 2 reports issued by Jack Smith, the special counsel, over the next couple weeks. So we'll hear more about these matters as we get closer to the inauguration.
And hopefully we'll get to have another conversation with you too. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
That is Nick Ackerman. You're watching CBC News Network.